Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we're going to be looking at a new Hypno card. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Hypno is back, and this is a very interesting card. And one with a very unique ability that I, for one, cannot draw a direct comparison to. So let's have a little bit of a gander, shall we? If we start off looking at the basics of Hypno here, it is a psychic Pokemon, which means you can use stuff like Spell Tag, and which does see a little bit of play. You can be accelerating energy with stuff like Malamar, which is quite nice. You do have a retreat cost of 2, which is just annoying, a weakness 2 psychic, which means Garbodor, and 110 HP, which is both pretty low for a stage 1, as well as meaning that you are very much in Zoroark range. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, we do not like the basics here very much at all. We do like that we're hitting weakness on Buzzwole GX, that's quite nice. And indeed the non-GX Buzzwole, but other than that, it's not particularly inspiring. But it doesn't really matter, because the lovely David Hochmann has gone and translated these attacks. Do make sure you're checking out RappelmannTCG on Facebook. And these are both very, very interesting, although one of them is an ability rather than an attack. So in terms of the ability here, then, what it reads is, when your opponent's Pokemon is KO'd, flip a coin. If heads, you get to choose their new active Pokemon. And this could be very, very nice indeed. Essentially, you get the choice of what they put active. Now, it seems the way it's worded at the moment, and there's always a possibility that it's going to be a little bit weird, and that the translation's going to be a little bit different. It could change. But as it stands at the moment, this is when it's knocked out. That means whether it's knocked out by damage during your turn, whether it's knocked out by self-damage, poison, burn, anything along those lines, no matter how it's knocked out, you get to choose your opponent's active Pokemon, if you can flip a heads. Now this is really, really good. If it's going into their turn, i.e. you take a KO, you choose their new active, what you're probably going to be doing is trying to grab something with a fairly high retreat. So a bunch of people play Macargo in their decks, and Macargo hasn't got a monumental retreat, but a retreat cost of 3 is high enough. And what you're basically doing here is disrupting your opponent. You force them into using something like a Guzma. Now, fine, a lot of decks are playing a lot of Guzma, but it means they're not playing something like a Cynthia to draw extra cards. And the reality is they're gonna run out of switching cards sooner or later. Maybe they do have something like a switch, in which case, brilliant. But a lot of decks aren't going to have that. Then an awful lot of decks at the moment are relying on the fact that they are playing Ace Roller and they are playing Guzma. And those are essentially their switching options, that's what they've got. So that means that you can essentially stop them doing stuff. And if they can't switch, they don't get to attack on their turn, and that is amazing. Also, if they are unable to switch, you get a free hit on whatever you happen to bring active, which in and of itself is pretty nice. But it gets even better if it's coming into your turn. If you can get a KO at the end of your opponent's turn, such that it's then your turn, but your opponent has to put a new active up, and you get to flip a heads, that means that you get a choice as to what your opponent actually puts into the active. And now this gets really, really good, because now you're choosing what you attack next. You get a KO, I don't know, let's say on something like a Buzzwole, then you make them put another Buzzwole active so you can KO that, and that's kind of 4 prizes without your opponent getting a chance to respond. So how do you actually get a KO coming into your turn? Well, there's a few different ways. Essentially, if they're poisoned and they get KO'd by poison coming into your turn, or using burn, or even using Shrine of Punishment so that a damage counter is placed between turns, and all of these place damage counters between turns, and if the last damage counter is placed between their turn and yours, you're going to be rolling here. We also have Confusion, whereby if they flip tails on Confusion, they get 30 damage, which might KO them, but also don't forget we got the new Parasect, which puts 2 damage counters on a confused Pokemon between turns, on your opponent's confused Pokemon, so that could work nicely as well. And this is where, if possible, you could really make hay with this, if you can make it work. And we've got some interesting cards. So Viper, remember, adds 10 damage to poison between turns, which means you can try and manipulate when they actually end up getting KO'd. For Burn, we've got Infernape. Now, Infernape's not quite as easy here. Infernape puts 6 extra damage counters on, which on the one hand is nice. Well, it puts 6 on rather than 2, 4 extra, but that's going to make it much more difficult to try and time the KO, whereas with Viper, because you're adding 1 with 1, 2 with 2, etc., although you're doing a bit less damage, it does make it easier to time the KO. Again, it's not easy, but if you can get it working, this will be amazing. In Expanded, we still have Excelgor, which was popular for quite a while in Standard. And Excelgor, for a double colourless energy, does 50 damage, plus paralysis and poison. And what you always tried to do with Excelgor was try and make sure that your opponent's Pokemon got KO'd coming into your turn, using something like Verbank City Gym if need be to manipulate the numbers, and then they would have to put up a new Pokemon. But there are some Pokemon where it's easier to use the poison damage and it's easier to get them KO'd coming into your turn. Well, good news. With Hypno, you get to choose. Now, unfortunately, it is a coin flip. And coin flip is a problem. This is not an attack, so you can't use Victini. This is only going to work 50% of the time. It is very similar in a way to Ludicolo. Now, I actually bought a playset of these Ludicolo, assuming they were going to be amazing. They never were. Which essentially was a Pokemon catcher. The thing is, this is a Pokemon catcher after a KO, which sometimes could be even better, and a lot of time will be even better, because you can really hurt your opponent here. As for the attack, it does 30 damage, plus 10 more for each card in your opponent's hand, for a Psychic and a double colourless energy. And frankly, sometimes this is going to be an amazing attack, and sometimes this is going to be a terrible, terrible attack. If we go to the two extremes, if we look at something like Unknown Hand, they are trying to fill their hand with as many cards as they possibly can, because if they can get 35 or more cards in hand, they can win the game. So against them, you're going to be doing a huge amount of damage. At the other end of the spectrum, we could mention Granbull here, which aims to end every turn with 0 cards in hand, at which case you're doing very, very little, and 30 for a Psychic double colourless, not good. The good news is here that if your opponent takes a prize, they will then have to put cards into their hand, and if they KO a tag team GX, something like Latias and Latios, they'll have to take free prizes. Now, admittedly, you don't really want to give your opponent free prizes. Letting your opponent take free prizes is not good, but you know, you get to do a little bit of extra damage. Maybe that's good. You know, could be nice. The thing is, there are certain GX attacks that will actually make this really quite nice. So something like Rayquaza, discard your hand, draw 10 cards. Drampa, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 10 cards. And Eevee, draw until you got 10 cards in hand. That's going to be really nice. It means you're doing 130 damage. But is 130 for a Psychic double colourless quite good enough? Maybe. But sometimes it's not going to be. And your opponent can try and clear their hand. Try and make it so they've got no cards in hand so you don't do enough damage, which would be nice. But then again, they're hurting themselves. They're basically saying, ha ha ha, I'm going to deliberately play cards I'd rather not play right now to hurt you. And as I've said on a number of occasions, if your opponent is deliberately playing cards they'd rather not be playing now to try and hurt you, that's kind of a win for you, to be honest. Now, if you really want to hit fairly low numbers, a Judge or Marshadow can guarantee they've got 4 cards in hand. Bearing in mind with a Choice Band, you'll then be doing 100 damage, which is enough to KO a Buzzwole, which, you know, it's quite nice. And then in Japan, not over here, we've not got this card and we're never going to, but Team Rocket's Harassment, will essentially do the same thing as a judge, but to 5 cards, which is an extra 10 damage. And before we finish, I do need to mention this is clearly a great partner for Garbodor. Garbodor does 20 damage for each item card your opponent has in the discard pile. So clearly here you say, look, either you keep your cards in your hand and I do more damage, or you play your item cards and I do more damage. Pretty much the same theory we use with Mimikyu and Gengar Tag Team GX. Of course, Garbodor is a stage 1 that for 1 energy does 20 extra for each item in the discard, whereas Hypno is a stage 1 that for 3 energy, 2 if you include double colorless, does an extra 10 damage for each card in their hand, so you do still want to really focus on avoiding Garbodor. Speaking of the energy, it's a little bit annoying, but it's not the end of the world. We've got double colorless energy that we can use, and we have got Malamar to accelerate energy, so it's not the end of the world. We can get the energy on here rather nicely. This is a good card with a nice ability, though it is on a coin flip, and an attack which could be quite good, but is a little situational and expensive for a stage 1. So let's go ahead and give it between 3 and 4 Wassies. We don't give half Wassies. That would be Barbaric. A very interesting card, and it's one of these abilities that you look at it and you go, sooner or later someone's going to break this. Sooner or later someone is going to make this card amazing. And you know that when they do, I'll be here to make a video about it. But now, ladies and gentlemen, I would very much like to know what you think about Hypno. So please do let me know in the comment section. Go nuts! But please do remember the most important thing as always, be nice, would ya? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays for some more Wassy action. I'm going to show you a new combiner in like an hour. But by far the most important thing as always is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross and you've been watching PTCG Radio.